On today's show, we'll be joined by none other than the voice of your Houston Rockets, Jonathan Sanford, the PA announcer inside Toyota Center. We'll take a look at his journey to become the PA announcer for your Houston Rockets, what makes that job so special to him as a huge fan of this team, and we'll also talk a little bit about the exciting future of your Houston Rockets with the additions from this past NBA draft, as well as just how fun this team looked this past season with Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, their rookie years, all of that and much, much more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. As always, we appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. Free and available on all platforms. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app. Also, check us out on YouTube. Remember our saying here, for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. Go comment on the YouTube channel. The comments help us out a ton. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Arcade 1-Up. Locked On Rockets is partnering with Arcade 1-Up to give away 3 free NBA JAM Shaq Edition machines. That's right, 3 of them. These are the guys known for making the incredible retro 3/4 scale at-home arcade games like Pac-Man, Golden Tee, and many, many more. Enter to win on arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade1up.com/lockedon for a chance to win a free Shaq Edition NBA JAM machine. Joining us now, 6'4" out of Jacksonville State University, is the starting PA announcer for your Houston Rockets, none other than Jonathan Sanford himself. What's up, Jonathan? Happy to have you here. Happy to have you here on the program.
It is great to be here. Finally get to sit down with Jackson Gatlin and talk Rockets. That's a special privilege for me. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, we've got some incredible conversation prepared today. But before we dive into some of the Rockets discussion, which, hey, there's a lot going on with this Rockets team, a lot to be excited about. We just finished the NBA draft, a lot of talent making its way to Houston. We're going to talk about that for sure a little bit later in the episode. But first, I want to get to know a little bit about your journey, Jonathan, kind of how you came to be a part of this Houston Rockets family. And where we have to start is just, where did you get your first role as a PA announcer?
Well, I was in high school at the time and had an opportunity to fill in for our high school announcer when I was a junior in high school, and I just fell in love with it from that point forward. I had been watching the NBA and NFL and college football and Major League Baseball, and I always had a little bit of an infatuation for the guy that you heard in the background who always had that booming voice and always kind of caught your attention. It really hit home for me when Ray Clay and the Chicago Bulls. Really, Ray was the first PA guy in the league to truly be featured in intros. So I tried to mimic everything I heard back then from the guys I heard in the background of those Major League Baseball and NBA and college football games. So tried to do that and started to kind of hone my skills as I got a little bit older.
So you mentioned Ray Clay there. Are there any other, names that you want to like kind of shout out, either, just how much of your style, your voice, your mannerisms are you versus the pieces of other broadcasters, other professionals that you've kind of like taken from over the years?
That's a great question, Jackson, because I think all of us who are PA guys, I had a chance to visit with a couple of guys out in LA here recently. And I think most of us find that we are somewhat of a combination of those experiences, like you said, that you've heard over the years, guys you've heard that you've picked up small things from. And, I've always tried to be myself, always tried to be Jonathan Sanford and be my own person. But you cannot help, Jackson, but a few things here or there that you pick up from other guys, maybe subconsciously. I don't think purposely you ever really do it, but subconsciously those things start to become a part of your makeup as an announcer.
So I do have to ask, because this is one of my favorite things that you started doing when you became the PA announcer for the Rockets, is you've got that during the tip off, right? You've got the elongated "it's game time." And I
Yeah.
love that call. Where did that come from? Where did that stem from?
So over the years watching the NBA, I didn't really see anybody doing anything particularly like that, and I just wanted to do something a little bit different to give that atmosphere a little bit of a pump. You know, the pregame for an NBA game, that part is the most intense moment to me prior to that ball bouncing on the court for the first time. So I wanted to build that up to that point where the first time the ball is touched. This is the way I explained it out in LA to somebody recently, and that is, so the referee gets the ball in his hand, and I started then. And if you've watched me, sometimes that can be a long period of time. I'm holding that out a long time between and keep on going until the ball is tipped in the air. But I still don't say it's game time until the player touches the basketball, whether it's our Rockets or the opposing player. Whenever they have that basketball in hand, I say, it's game time. So that's just kind of something I did to try to spice up the pregame and the intro as we get into the action.
So have you done PA for anything other than basketball? Like, have you done other sports, and how does it compare one versus the other?
Oh man, I've been privileged to do just about every sport. It's interesting. I grew up in Alabama, so hockey and soccer were not really things that I grew up with. But after moving to Texas, and as I like to say, I got here to Texas as quick as I could. I married a Texan, right? I've had opportunities to do soccer. I've done hockey, football, basketball, baseball, softball. With the UIL each year, I do the state championships for various sports: wrestling, football, basketball, baseball, softball. So you have to be kind of knowledgeable a bit about every sport so that when you get behind that mic, you're not clueless about what you're to do.
And I wonder again. So, like, is there one sport that's maybe a bit easier to call for, one that's a bit harder, where either just the pace of play is moving so much faster? Like, how does that kind of compare across the different sports that you've called for?
That's another great question, because I think a lot of people would think that basketball is one of the toughest to call from that standpoint, but so much of basketball becomes a rhythm for you as an announcer, whether you're on TV or radio or even PA. You begin to develop a rhythm. You like when a game has a rhythm to it. You don't like when there are constantly fouls and interruptions going on, because it's harder to get into a rhythm. But I wouldn't say that basketball is the toughest. I would say, honestly, the most challenging PA that I've ever done was hockey, because of the fact that I just wasn't that familiar with it, to be quite honest. Soccer, the same way. But baseball is probably the easiest, Jackson, from a PA standpoint, and it almost puts me to sleep. Now, the game doesn't put me to sleep, but the lack of announcing, because you do so little announcing. You announce when a batter comes up to the plate, and then the next batter, and then the numbers between innings, and that's pretty much it, other than PA reads and other things. So, football in the fall, Jackson, got to tell you, between the NBA and football, those are my two greatest passions. I love the atmosphere of a high school football game or a college football game, and being in a stadium that is packed with people there. I just absolutely love that. I've always been a big fan of that feeling, and really, that's what got a lot of my attention, was growing up in Alabama, going to Alabama football games, going to Legion Field. There was an announcer there by the name of Simpson Pepper, who was there
Oh,
for many, many
what a
years.
name! That's an
Yeah,
incredible name.
yeah, and he always had these various sayings that you never forget. Like, he had one before a game, as it was getting closer to kickoff. He would say, "The current Legion Field time is," and then he would give the time, and that's something small, minute like that, but it really caught my attention as a kid. So I really love football, but the greatest of all for me, the greatest atmosphere that I've ever been involved in, is the NBA, and being a part of that atmosphere, 18,000 fans inside an arena, pivotal moments in a game, making those calls that to me have made so many memories for myself, and hopefully some memories for the folks who've been in the arena as well.
And you've been a part of some amazing NBA teams over the years. Specifically, obviously, you spent some time in San Antonio. Look, this is a Rockets podcast. We're going to get to some Rockets-specific discussion here in a moment, but I do want the chance to ask you just what was your favorite memory working for the San Antonio Spurs, kind of carving out those memories that you highlighted there?
All right, there are two big ones for me. The first is always going to be the 2014 NBA championship. That entire playoff run, starting with Dallas going to a Game 7, and it seemed like the situation was pretty dire going into Game 7, and then the Spurs just really dominated the Mavericks during that Game 7. You head on to Portland. You really just trounce Portland there, does the Spurs, and then the big matchup with Oklahoma City. I'll never forget, there was a fairly lesser-known player for the Spurs that year by the name of Corey Joseph. And if you remember, that particular Oklahoma City Thunder had Serge Ibaka. Does that name ring a bell for you, Jackson?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit, right? Well, in Game 1 and 2, Serge was out with an injury. Game 3, back in Oklahoma City, he comes back into the game. Game 3, they blow the Spurs out. Game 4, they blow the Spurs out. But Pop put in this little lone guard from the University of Texas by the name of Corey Joseph. And Corey, at the end of that ball game, and somewhat of trash time, Serge Ibaka was still out there. And Corey Joseph, to everybody's shock, goes and dunks on Serge Ibaka, which was just, wow, where did that come from? Like, he had no fear. And then going into Game 5, it was almost as if the Spurs were like, okay, if Corey Joseph doesn't fear Serge Ibaka, maybe we shouldn't as well. So we blew out Oklahoma City in Game 5 there in San Antonio, beat them in Game 6 back in Oklahoma City, set up the rematch with Miami there. And, of course, that culminated in a Spurs championship for them in 2014. That was a great memory. The second greatest memory for me, because I have been so attached to the Rockets from moving to Houston back in 2003 and becoming a Rockets fan even before that with Robert Horry, to the series in 2017 between the Rockets and the Spurs. I had so many mixed emotions in that series because I have so many friends here in Houston. At one point, I was a Rockets fan right alongside them when we lived here, and then never thought I would end up with the Spurs. So in that series, it was a tremendous series, and certainly for me, the end of game number 5 with Manu Ginobili blocking James Harden from behind, I just never would have imagine that in my entire life. So you lose Kawhi Leonard with about 3 minutes to go in regulation, and somehow the Spurs still won that basketball game. I had already in my mind from my seat was beginning to think about, I was going to go to Game 6 in Houston anyway. There was no way I was going to miss that. So in my mind, I was already thinking about, well, what's Game 6 going to be like in Houston with them with the series advantage? And wow, things certainly changed at the end of that basketball game. Those are two of my favorite memories.
Well, we're happy to have reclaimed you here in Houston. Now you're the voice of the Houston Rockets, as it rightly should be. Despite the amazing times in San Antonio, you're ours now, Jonathan. So with that,
this is where my heart is, and I'm so grateful, Jackson, that folks like yourself and so many Rockets fans. I was a little nervous. You come into your first season with the organization and thinking, wow, is this guy going to be, are these folks going to accept me because I was once with the Spurs? They're going to hate my guts. And, man, you folks have just been incredible, from the folks on Twitter to all the game operations people, writers like yourself that cover the sport. Man, you've all treated me like $1 million, and I can't thank you enough for that.
Well, we couldn't be more happy to have you as part of the Rockets family. That's what I want to talk about a little bit next. We're going to get away from some of this Spurs discussion.
Please,
just kind of wipe that off for ourselves a
little
little bit. Coming up, we're going to talk a little Rockets with Jonathan. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at Sakara. Feeling your best starts with what you eat. Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. Now is the time to seek wellness, joy, and abundance in all areas of your life, starting with what you eat. With Sakara, you get nutrient-dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish your body without ever sacrificing taste or quality. Sakara is a wellness company that's anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Their nutritionally designed, chef-crafted meals are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. All the stuff that you should be caring about. Plus, it's delivered right to your doorstep, ready to eat. Right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their very first order when they go to sakara.com/lockedon20 or enter code lockedon20 at checkout. That's Sakara, SAKARA.com/lockedon20 to get 20% off your very first order. Sakara.com/lockedon20. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Continue our conversation with the voice of your Houston Rockets, Jonathan Sanford. One of the many voices, right? Because there's so many voices with the Houston Rockets, but this is the big booming voice inside Toyota Center. So, Jonathan, I got to know, what was it like finding out that you got the job with the Rockets? Just walk us through, receiving that news and kind of what that meant to you to know, hey, I'm going to be back in the chair.
I'll be completely honest with you and all of your viewers, Jackson. When I was approached about talking with the Rockets, I really approached it from the thought that maybe with COVID, they were just looking for a backup. I mean, it's COVID and you never know. And I really, when they first reached out to me and said they'd like to speak to me, I was thinking, okay, well, it's nice that they respect me enough to even have me come in as a backup in case something were to happen to the main PA guy. I know that Matt had announced that he was, going to be moving to radio full time, but in my mind, I thought they've got to have their guy, right? So when they reached out to me and we went through that process, I've got to tell you, I was calling my daughter's homecoming football game. She was the drum major for Clearbrook this past fall. And I'm in the press box there, and I've got my spotter in the press box, and I'm announcing the high school football game. And I look down, and there my phone is ringing in the middle of this football game. And I don't recognize the number, but I thought maybe it was a booster president or somebody at the game that needed to pass on some information. So when I answered the phone and it turned out it was the folks from the Rockets, at first my mind was thinking, well, they're calling to say, hey, we'd like to go ahead and make you official as the backup. But when I was told in that moment, you are the guy, I said, well, that's pretty big, because that was not the news that I expected to hear. But immediately, I mean, every ounce of emotion just came up through me, because Jackson, let me tell you, having done this before, it is one of the greatest passions of my life. And from 2018 through 2021, not being able to fulfill that passion left a void in my life. So in that moment, all this emotion just came flooding up. And I said, well, listen, my immediate answer is yes, but please give me a moment to talk to my family. And so went home that night and brought it up with my family. And Jackson, I have 5 children. I have Haley, Tegan, Billy, Amelia, and Zachary from age 18 to age 8. And to see the looks on their faces, because they've missed it. They've missed being a part of that NBA atmosphere and going to games and hearing me announce inside an arena. So the look on their faces, the joy on my wife's face, if you know the story of my leaving San Antonio, the joy on my wife's face. But she was always the one, Jackson, that was always saying, oh, you'll get another opportunity. But in my mind, I'm thinking, I just gave up an opportunity. That's not going to happen again. There's only 32 teams in the NBA. That's never going to happen for me again. The look on her face, it was not, I told you so. It was, we prayed about this and this is really a reality for you. And she was so joyous for me that night. So I knew that yes was the right decision in response.
And Jonathan, you talk about, the passion for doing this, right? And the passion bleeds through when you talk about it, right? When you talk about, getting this opportunity again to be the voice for the Houston Rockets. We talk a lot about home court advantage in sports, right? How much of a role do you feel that the PA announcer in general and that you particularly play in creating that home court environment for a team?
Well, I have to say, I think it's a team effort to provide that home court advantage. I would never say that myself as a PA guy will do anything just tremendously effective if I don't have a crowd of people who are passionate as well, and a team of game operations, game presentation people who know how to work that system as well. I think I'd be a little bit egotistical to believe that I by myself could do anything to change the environment inside an NBA arena, but all of us together, my voice, the voices of the fans inside the arena, and all the staff that I work with, I think together, maybe Jackson, that combines so that I can be effective in my job of if the environment, if the noise level is not what it should be, together we can bring that back up to motivate the team. And I have seen moments and over the years where our teams have come out and not maybe started the game with a lot of energy, but then with the crowd getting into it and firing them back, I've seen teams come back because of that effort that we've all made together. So I hope that's okay to say that, Jackson, but I don't put it all on myself. I put it on us as a team.
No, and I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it, right? The players on the court are a team, and everybody enjoying the game and creating that environment together. You yourself, the fans, everybody, the game operation staff. That's another team, right? Trying to hopefully change the ebb and flow and vibe of the game in the favor of the home team. In this case, of course, our Houston Rockets. But you do talk about the fans, right? And you're incredibly involved with the fans, right? You're active on social media, engaging with the fan base, which to me is one of the best parts about this Rockets organization is that individuals like yourself, Ryan Hollins, Craig Ackerman feel so accessible. So when stuff happens like the Gary Bird phenomena, right? How do things like that factor into what you do as far as like what you're allowed, the calls that you're allowed to make, like over the PA, stuff like that?
All right. First of all, I love the creative freedom that the Houston Rockets have given me. I had certain freedoms in San Antonio, but never the great creative freedom that Julian Duncan and all the folks involved with the Houston Rockets and game presentation marketing have given me. So, and I think Craig and Ryan and Matt Thomas will tell you, whenever you have a situation like the Gary Bird phenomenon from earlier this past season, I'm the new guy. I was kind of going to wait to see what Craig and Matt kind of did since I'm the new guy on block. But boy, it was too good to pass up after a while. It was such a fantastic moment in the season when, you go on that stretch, you win game number 1 at home, and that was a great night. But then 15 games, I believe, before the next win, and bringing Gary Bird on with us was certainly a special moment to see him perform and then hear that phrase used by the fans, and then to watch the broadcast and hear Craig Ackerman and Ryan Hollins get in on the show a little bit. So I played it a little slow, but was glad to be able to get a few Gary Birds out before too long.
And so I'm curious how that works from the standpoint of the players. Do the players ever give you maybe like a special request, like, hey, when I hit a three, can you say this or anything of that nature?
In past experiences, yes. Being the new guy, not a lot of the players knew me, and there was a lot of new faces. I think you know that, Jackson. So many new faces in the organization this past year. As you get to know the players, things like that will continue to develop, and I'm always open to that because usually they have some pretty cool ideas. I was able to work in Splash Gordon and Flash Gordon this year. With, of course, the Gary Bird situation, the Texas tornado, Jae'Sean Tate. So there were a few things that we were able to work in this year to kind of add a little spice to the flavor.
Do you have an example of maybe a past occurrence, either maybe with your time with the Spurs, where somebody came to you and was like, hey, like if I dunk like this, can you get me like with any examples like that you can share?
None specifically that I can share, given some of those were pretty private conversations, but I will nod and say yes. There were a couple, and they were special because I knew it meant something to the player. And generally, Jackson, if it means something to the player, it's going to connect with the fans in a pretty cool way.
I love that. That's incredible. I kind of have a follow up from that, and a bit of a different line of thinking here. But I've always been so curious, like just during the course of a game, when you are getting ready to make a call over the PA or anything, all right, like obviously you're reacting to what's happening on the court for sure. But things like things that are dependent on what's actually going on in the game, like a foul or things like that. Are you reacting to what the refs signal and call out, things of that nature, or do you wait for like an official scorekeep or producer or something to convey the message to you?
All right, a few things for that. First of all, I'm one of the only guys in the league that keeps all of my stats. I know talking with other PA announcers over the last decade, very few keep their own stats nowadays. I went paperless in 2015. I switched all to iPads and keeping all of my stats using an Apple Pencil and a program that I created for my iPad so that I can keep up with those stats throughout a game. It helps me to stay connected. It helps me to stay focused throughout the game. But when it comes to the report of those things, such as fouls, we as a PA person are very dependent on the correct signals from the referees, from our officials. So if a referee looks at you and gives you the numbers, you have to read those numbers correctly, then make the announcement. Foul is on number 32, blah, blah. His first personal, first team. And I'm keeping all that foul information myself. And that has come in handy over the years. There was a moment back in the 2015-2016 season where I had kept my stats, and it turned out in the overtime period that my stats were correct, and the official book had an issue. And I'll never forget that night because the refs trusted me enough. Our relationship was well enough that they looked at me for the clarification, and that made me feel pretty good for a moment until Kyrie Irving went and buried a three, and I went from hero to zero pretty quick.
Oh man, that's an incredible roller coaster of an anecdote. Just like, oh, I filled in a role, I helped out the refs, and then oh no, I helped out
I
the
will
refs.
never forget that as long as I live, because the situation set up, they sent him to the foul line, and I knew that was the first foul in the last 2 minutes. I knew that we were not over the limit. They sent him to the line. He had already shot one free throw, and I'm going, this is not right. But I can't, Jackson, I can't get on the microphone and stop the game. That's not my responsibility. It's up to that official bookkeeper to blow the horn and get them over there if there's an issue like that. But he was unsure at the moment. And one of the assistant coaches for the Spurs at the time, Will Sevening, came over to me. He knew how well I kept stats, and he looked at me. He was keeping stats as well, and he knew it wasn't right. And so then, of course, Popovich gets involved and comes over. There's a picture of me. It looks like I'm lecturing the refs, but I'm not. I'm just going over the foul count and when everything happened. And then so they took the points off the board, took him away from the free throw line, gave him the ball side out, and then wouldn't you know it, he hits a three. So, like I said, I went from hero to zero pretty quick.
All right. Well, coming up, I do want to talk a little bit about the exciting future that we have here in Houston with the draft selections that the Rockets just made, with the impressive year that we just had with Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and company. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net continues to be your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. Find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. They've got you covered for Major League Baseball, MMA, UFC, boxing, even golf. You name it, they've got it over at BetOnline. It is your source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And right now, you can take a look at the odds-on favorite to be the NBA 2K23 cover athlete of the year. Right now, Steph Curry is the favorite at plus 120. You got John Morant at plus 125 right behind him. And then rounding out the top five, Jason Tatum at plus 400, Nikola Jokic at plus 600, and then Joel Embiid bringing it home at plus 650. So for all of that and more odds, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Jonathan, this is arguably an incredible time to be a Houston Rockets fan. Look, this was a Rockets team that was vying for championships for the better part of the last decade. And as per the NBA life cycle, eventually you bottom out, you start a rebuild. But part of the exciting thing about the rebuild is you get to watch these young, insanely talented players grow and coalesce and develop with one another. We just are off the heels of an incredibly exciting season in which we saw Jalen Green start to flourish at the end of the season. We saw Alperen Sengun and just his, highlights every single time that kid touched the floor. To you, what was your favorite part of this past season that really stood out to you, be it a specific player, a moment, a game, anything off the top of your head?
All right, Jackson, I'm just going to put it to you like this. I never had, in all the time in my previous locale, I never had the opportunity to watch player development from their first time on the court at the beginning of the season to their last dribble at the end of the season. I never had that opportunity really before. So for me, coming into this season, getting to see the birth of Jalen Green as an NBA player, to witness his development throughout the season, to see the ups, the downs, the ebb and flow of his game early in the season, and how after his injury coming back and just continuing to excel and grow. And then other guys like Josh Christopher, who in all expectation by folks at the beginning of the year would have never imagined the way he would excel throughout the season. For me, that was the most enjoyable part, because it was a brand new opportunity for me, a brand new opportunity to witness something that I've not had the opportunity to witness before, and that is to see a person, a player, both on and off the court develop in such a special way. And that was the case for, like you mentioned, for Jalen, for Josh, for Alperen Sengun, and for others. It was just, yeah, the wins and losses. Certainly any Rockets fan would love to have seen more wins, but the development is, I went into this season and my mindset was not about wins or losses. It was about development. And I wanted to see what these guys were capable of from the beginning of the season to the end of the season in terms of their development. At the end of the season, I remember walking to that tunnel, and I saw you that night, and walking out of that arena that night, I felt absolutely fantastic because of the fact that I saw the development throughout the course of that season, and those guys that gave you so much pleasure and so much hope in the offseason with the draft coming up and what would be possible for this next season.
Jonathan, do you ever have to catch yourself? Because you got some of the best seats in the house right there on the sideline. Do you ever have to catch yourself like in the midst of a game, like you see like fast breaks coming and you see Jalen Green, KJ Martin, they're trucking it, and you know that you're on the verge of a huge highlight, and like your jaw's about to hit the table or something when they soar through the air, or the crazy dunks going down, or you see them pull up from multiple feet behind the 3-point line. Do you ever have to kind of like stop yourself as a fan and remember, oh no, I'm working right now?
Now, the fan word, that's the key, right? Because I'm a fan. I'm a huge Rockets fan. And so you have to be careful with that emotion, right? Because you're dead center on the side of the court, center court, in an NBA arena. And in one hand, your emotion is boiling out, right? You want to show it so much because it's such a spectacular moment. We saw a few of those last season, especially some of the dunks by Jalen Green and some of the just fantastic moments in this past season. But I try to take that excitement and then work it up through that set of lungs that God has blessed me with, so it comes out of my mouth and through that microphone so everybody can hear it versus see it. And sometimes I just want to duck under the table because I just want to get down there and start fist bumping. Something has got me so excited, but I can't allow 18,000 people to see me fist bumping, right? But there are certainly moments where you feel like it. I can promise you that.
I'm so curious to know here, when it comes to those emotions, right, those big time moments in the game, if you have to choose, right, does it come down to, do you choose like highlight level, insane, like poster dunk, or game winning shot?
Mine is always going to be the game-winning shot. That's what we live for. That is the moment that, as an announcer, you lay in the bed and you think about your call. You think about that call that you could make in that critical moment at the end of the game when the game is on the line, when that timeout, when the crowd is on their feet and you're trying to get that entire arena to react and respond as loud as they can. I lay and I dream about those scenarios. The dunks happen so fast, Jackson. They happen and then they're gone, right? But those game-winning moments, they last for a lifetime. They stick with you. You never forget them as long as you live. You relive them so many times away from the game when you're daydreaming or you're watching old videos. I got to answer again those game-winning shots.
We're going to have to combine the two. We'll say game-winning post or dunk. But
that's a good one. That's a good one.
Now, the Rockets just came away from the NBA draft and they added, 3 exciting new prospects to this already exciting young core, joining Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and some of the other names that we've already mentioned, Josh Christopher, the rest of the really young, exciting Rockets team. And at the top of that draft was Jabari Smith Jr. What to you excites you the most about Jabari Smith Jr. as a prospect, as somebody to bring into this Rockets organization?
Everything. Every single thing.
Well, that sums it up.
I mean,
I love it.
I know that's a simple answer, but doggone. So, Jackson, I'm an Alabama fan. My sister's an Auburn fan. I have a lot of connections down at the
a house divided
at Auburn University. And everybody I've spoken with over the last year has raved about this young man, about his drive, his integrity, his character, the work ethic that he brings to the table, and just the ability he has on that court to take all that preparation and execute it in a way that is professional and will show itself at the very right moments in time. And everybody that I've talked to has raved about this young man. And I really, Jackson, when we were the 3rd pick and everybody was purporting that Jabari Smith was going to be the first pick in the NBA draft, I thought rightfully so, right? I mean, this kid was fantastic. And so on draft night, hearing the Houston Rockets select Jabari Smith, Auburn, hearing that, man, my elation, I screamed loud enough that my wife thought something had happened. I mean, I'm here in my studio room watching it, and I just let out a big scream. And for me to scream that way over an Auburn player, it tells you how much I love this young man.
He's going to be an incredible addition to this Houston Rockets team. I was very firm on Jabari Smith Jr. being at the top of my draft board all throughout the pre-draft cycle. And I got into a point where, like yourself, I was looking at it, I was like, well, yeah, Orlando should take him number 1. He's the number 1 prospect in the draft for a variety of reasons. He gives you the shooting, the defense. He's got the size. Like, what's not to love about this kid? And so for him to be available to the Houston Rockets at pick number 3, to echo Rafael Stone's excitement when he was talking to us in the post-draft media availability, he goes, it was huge. Like, Rafael Stone's not usually an animated man, and he let his emotion show in that moment that he was excited about the addition of this young man to this Rockets team.
It was, to me, the night before, I had like this dream the night before, and it didn't turn out the way reality did. And sometimes your dreams are better than reality, right? But in this case, reality was the absolute best. So, yeah, starting with Jabari Smith, a great addition to the Houston Rockets.
And then not only that, but also adding Tari Eason, another versatile forward, great defensive acumen, a guy with some size who can defend so many different positions on the floor and has a pretty solid offensive bag for somebody that gives you everything he does defensively. And then also Ty Washington, who they got at 29, which is an absolute steal, and who has already become a fan favorite in Houston, hasn't played a single minute on the court, and Rockets fans are already absolutely in love with Ty Washington.
An all SEC draft for the Houston Rockets. And that was pretty special to me because I watched the SEC primarily, and I watched my Alabama Crimson Tide take on the LSU Tigers, and seeing Tari over the last year, just a special, like you say, ball player defensively. I can't wait to watch on a switch Jabari Smith, Tari Eason. That'll be a fun situation for Rockets fans. And then Ty, he's just barely getting the cusp of what he can show as a player. He's going to grow, and I think Rockets fans are going to be pleased with what he brings to the table.
I have to put in a request here, Jonathan, because I'm sure you've seen this already making the rounds, but Bari and Tari is making the rounds as a nickname duo between Jabari and Tari Eason. And at some point, if there is an assist, a lob play, something.
You see, I'm way ahead of you. I'm way ahead of you. I've already thought about
already got
that.
it in the works. That is my humble request, as per I'm sure many other Rockets fans, that we need to hear that echoing, reverberating around the walls of Toyota Center sometime next season.
I grew up back in the old days of video games, and Atari was my first video game console. That tells folks how old I am, right? But I loved he had on a necklace with an Atari logo on it. And so I've been thinking about that, joystick, whatever. And then just various things that I've been brainstorming for Tari Eason. Of course, Jabari, man, I gotta really come up with something great, because I've got all these Auburn fans back in Alabama that are already hitting me up on social media and even calling my cell phone going, what are you going to do for Jabari Smith? You got to come up with something, son. So don't worry. We're in good hands.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of Auburn fans have now co-opted, the Rockets as their like NBA team of choice. That I saw a flood of them. They were like, "Hey, we don't root for an NBA team right now already, so like we're just gonna suddenly start rooting for the Houston Rockets." And I love that for the Rockets organization. We welcome all Auburn fans with open arms, as well as LSU fans and Kentucky fans. You can come as well for Tari and for Ty. But Jonathan, any parting words here for the Rockets fans who have made it to the very end of this podcast?
Well, first of all, thank you for listening to me for this period of time. I don't claim to be one of the most exciting people on social media or as an interview, but man, I just thank you for spending your time, a little bit of your time, listening to a little bit of my life and my experience with your Houston Rockets. I am delighted that we are getting closer and closer to another Houston Rockets season. I wish, in fact, if anybody out there wants to travel with me to Las Vegas, to the Thomas and Mack Center for that opening game on July the 7th, as your Houston Rockets take on the Orlando Magic. If anybody wants to travel with me out there, hey, we might can do that, because the thought of seeing Jabari Smith and Paolo Banchero on the other side might be an interesting, fun night for Rockets fans.
That's going to be an absolutely must-watch, must-see matchup. I'll be out there in Vegas Summer League for that matchup, so definitely.
Good for you, man.
There we go.
Good for you.
We might have to do a Rockets meetup of some caliber out there for all the Rockets fans that can make it out there. But Jonathan, an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Do me a favor, let our listeners know where they can track you down at.
You can find me on Twitter at TheJSanford. Again, at TheJSanford.
Jonathan, appreciate your time.
Thank you, man. Go Rockets.
That's going to do it for our episode with Jonathan Sanford, the voice of your Houston Rockets for every game at Toyota Center. Let me know what you thought of the episode in the YouTube comments. You can listen to the episode wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. I already mentioned YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.